Hello, everybody, and welcome to Friday Apocryphal Podcast, your one-stop shop for everything Friday Apocryphal and podcast. And boy, do we have a show for you today. Today we are covering 2 Maccabees chapters 1 through 2.
I thought we were doing the chapters.
I guess we could do that, yeah.
I mean, we aren't in Psalms because
You're right, yeah.
Psalms doesn't have chapters. It has Psalms.
Psalms, yeah.
Right, but fuck it.
Either way, we're here, and we are starting 2 Maccabees. So
now, 2 Maccabees. Second verse, same as the first. A little bit louder and a whole lot worse from what I remember. It's not that different.
Okay. So nice little rhyming thing you had there. Yeah. So 2 Maccabees tells a good chunk of the same story, and it's basically a more religious version, and it is coming from a different perspective, and we will see differences because the first guy was, in 1 Maccabees, the author was trying to justify the Hasmonean dynasty. In this, it's a little bit different, and we'll get to that. But there are three basic components that we should talk about. So actually, should we introduce some of the commentaries that we're working with?
Yeah, so I have the Anchor Bible 2 Maccabees, a new translation with introduction and commentary by Jonathan A. Goldstein, just like we were using his 1 Maccabees.
Yeah, and that one actually has a chronological table that is better than the one that he had in his first one. We also have 2 Maccabees, the 2 Maccabees commentary from the Hermenia commentary series by Robert Doran. And this is a fantastic critical commentary on it. I read through the introduction for this, and we're definitely going to be using it for textual notes.
All right. We also have Eerdmans.
Yes, we do, and that has a decent amount on 2 Maccabees, and we also have from the New Interpreter's Bible, the New Interpreter's Bible Commentary, which this is volume 4 or 6, I forget, 6. This is volume 6. Yeah, so we have quite a bit to go through, and I just want to introduce some of the concepts that we'll be covering. So there are three components. It has 2 introductory letters to begin with, and that's the first 2 chapters. And then it gets into the narrative, but it's really a condensed version of a narrative because the author says that he is summarizing or abridging the works of one Jason of Cyrene, and we will talk about him today.
Yeah, who is Jason of Cyrene?
So there is quite a lot of notes here. So Jason, presumably a Hellenistic Jew, is more likely to have written his work in Alexandria, as the 2 prefix letters suggest, than in Cyrene. And it also says that Cyrene used to be called something else, so it would have been Jason of... Well, I'll have to find it. We'll get to that. But either way, we don't actually have the full work, but the author of this book says that it was 5 volumes, so a 5-volume work that he's abridging. And it ends in a weird place, too. It ends after, I forget whose death it ends after, but the point is, 1 Maccabees continues the story after that person's death. This one does not, so it's unclear if perhaps Jason was writing during that time, or he just left that part out because, to suit his purposes, or if the abridger left it out. So we have no real idea. It would be cool to have his entire compilation of works. But anyways, here's some stuff about the components of the whole of 2 Maccabees.
All right.
So there's the letters that I talked about initially, and the narrative. And there are actually quite a bit of contradictions between them two. One of them is the death of Antiochus IV, which we will cover. So one account is going to be in chapter 2, and another account is going to be in chapter 9. And we're going to cover all of that more in depth. And there's a whole debate that's discussed in Dorn's commentary in the Hermenia series about the composition of these two. So there's a debate over the number of letters before the narrative prologue, and including where they end also, the letters themselves. Because for one of them, it's pretty clear, but for the other one, it's just not, because it doesn't leave an end date and it, kind of breaks off and then it kind of ends. So we're not really sure about that, but the consensus is obviously that there are these two letters. So, yeah, as I mentioned, the death of Antiochus IV is different. One of the other things is in the letters, there's a hope that God's mercy would be shown in the end. But in the narrative, there's a hope of those killed for the sake of the ancestral laws. The hope of those killed for the sake of the ancestral laws is for renewal of resurrection. And then there are differences in the second letter led some to think it was added later. And we're going to be talking about the textual history of this as well.
Well, you can also say that letters, as a literary device, they don't have to be consistent with the reality that is put forward by the narrative.
Sure, yeah. So these two letters were written specifically for groups of people. So and they were addressed to those groups.
Right.
Yeah.
And that brings with it all the propaganda that's going to come with that.
So here's some problems connecting the first letter to the narrative. There's no mention of Antiochus IV's persecution or martyrdoms, which is weird because the narrative does talk about that. And also no mention is made of the day of Nicanor, which we did discuss briefly in our readings of First Maccabees. So something with the language here. So here's a quote. It reliably reflects the language and institutions of the 2nd century BCE. So written from the 2nd century, obviously, because a lot of people postulated that it could have been later. Like the dating for this book is spanning anywhere between the mid 1st century, the mid 2nd century BCE to the mid 1st century CE. So there's quite a big range of possible dates for that. And what's really interesting, I think, that Dorn also notes is the amount of rhetorical devices. Like the writing is just, I think, better overall, especially in Greek, which is most likely the original. And one of the things that's noted here is it's a local history. That's the genre. It's a local history. And as I noted earlier, it ends very strangely. And there are a lot of questions here about who's who, because we get references to people we heard about before, but maybe they're not the people we heard about before. They're just the same name, which makes it kind of confusing. For example, how many Timothys are there? How many Philips are there?
Right.
Yeah. There's the dating of Lysias's campaign. So a lot of that stuff. There's a good amount to talk about. And then he actually, Dorn includes his own timeline in his book that we will get, and perhaps later we can compare it to the timeline that Goldstein has.
All right. Yeah, Goldstein also has quite a bit. I'm talking like pages after pages after pages.
Oh, yeah, he
about the historicity of these letters.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm going to summarize that by saying, according to Goldstein, these Elias Bickerman,
who was his teacher apparently,
unlocked the secrets of this remarkable, authentic document, which has puzzled readers for ancient and modern. Many modern scholars had considered it to be a forgery. On the authenticity, see notes on verse 7. But his notes on verse 7, they're all linguistic arguments, mostly about Hebrew syntax and translation. And so I'm assuming that somewhere in this massive text, he makes a linguistic argument for the legitimacy of the letters.
Yeah. In fact, in Erdman's commentary, there is quite a bit about Goldstein's arguments, which I think will summarize it better than we could.
Yeah. Okay.
So, from some of the stuff on that Goldstein notes, so really the only thing that is included in Second Maccabees that is not included in First Maccabees, fantastic, that's not included in Second Maccabees is the priesthood of Onias, who we will also cover some of his life, I suppose. And of course, there are some differences between First and Second Maccabees. For example, there's a disagreement on the name of the festival, for example. So in First Maccabees 4:59,
we're talking about Hanukkah here, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So in the first one, it says days of the dedication of the altar, while in Second Maccabees, it says that it's called days of the purification of the temple. And as I noted, it ends in a very strange place. And the first letter, at least according to Goldstein, is authentic, and he dates it to November 124 or 123 BCE. He notes that this first letter was translated from Greek or Aramaic. It was translated from a Greek or Aramaic original. And that's actually what the first long note is. Yeah. So then he says that the second letter was written in Greek and contains, a plethora of contradictions. And I have here cited page numbers too. And then the author of Fourth Maccabees actually used the abridgment as a source. He notes that, which I just thought was interesting. But the thing is, the author of Second Maccabees had plenty of sources himself. For example, the secret archives, he notes that there are some secret archives that there were, and Josephus can actually verify that because he knows that there were secret archives in the Jerusalem temple. And then he has arguments about dating some of the documents. What
was in the secret archives at the Jerusalem temple?
Secret stuff? It was secret.
We'll figure it out.
Books and scrolls.
Probably something like that.
It's an archive.
We'll figure it out. Probably a lot of Hechelot stuff.
Yeah, probably.
Legal documents.
So he comes up with another possible source for both First and Second Maccabees, and he calls it the common source. And I don't know, I thought his argument was kind of weak for it, honestly. But it's there, so we can always look that up. And he also has a list of possible sources for all the sections, and that's on page 50. If you want to flip to that, he gives a list of sources, and then he also gives a textual witness list for all of our manuscripts for it, and where we're getting the information from, at least from a textual standpoint.
Oh, you know what? If I knew what these stood for, then I would be able to read where all of these passages come from.
Yeah.
Oh, wait, there's a key.
Yeah, at least according to Goldstein.
Okay, so these sections that we're going over today, they come from mostly Seleucid Chronicle. There's a couple of common source verses in there, and there's a couple of pieces of Hasmonean propaganda. I don't see any legendary sources in.
Oh yeah, he also talks about a legendary source.
Yeah. But he does denote legendary source, but none of that is in what we're going over today. Today we're going over Hasmonean propaganda, Seleucid Chronicle, and common source.
And there's actually the list of textual witnesses is on page 128. So if you want to check that out. Well, that's the stuff that I initially got from Goldstein's introduction and Doran's introduction. And the thing about this is Doran actually, he wrote the section on First and Second Maccabees in the New Interpreter's Bible Commentary as well. So before we get into it proper, we should probably note some of this stuff. So, just to give some context for this, the story starts during the reign of Seleucus the Fourth Philopator. That's 187 to 175 BCE, and ends with the defeat of Nicanor in 161, providing much more detail than First Maccabees does about the parties and factions in Jerusalem prior to the persecution of Antiochus IV. Some stuff on style. In contrast to First Maccabees, which was originally written in Hebrew and then translated into Greek, the bulk of Second Maccabees, 2:19 through 15:39, often referred to as the epitome or the epitome. I don't know. Epitome, yeah. I don't know. I just never used it for a compilation of text, yeah. So it was written in the typical Greek style of the day. The prologue evidences knowledge of Hellenistic historiographical conventions, as do the reflections that the author, commonly called the epitomist, inserts into the narrative. And
I will say that in the Goldstein, not Goldman, the Goldstein commentary here, it says Epistle 1, this first letter, survives in Greek, but whoever wrote the Greek either translated a Hebrew, less likely an Aramaic, document, or thought in Hebrew or Aramaic. The letter is written in almost complete accordance with the rules of Hebrew and Aramaic epistolary style, which were quite different from their Greek counterparts. He says to check out some books about the writing style about that.
Yeah.
So at least this first part may have been originally written in Hebrew.
Sure. Then some stuff about worldviews. While the narrative shows the influence of Greco-Roman literary conventions, the author has used these conventions to portray a confrontation between Judaism and Hellenism. And here's something that I thought was really interesting. As far as we know, this is the first appearance of the term Judaism.
Oh.
For this author, the Jews are the civilized norm, whereas the Greeks are barbarians. The Jewish scribe Eliezer, and not his opponents, is the one who acts nobly. This attitude of separation of Jews from non-Jews is particularly evident in the author's discussion of the gymnasium in Jerusalem. That's, of course, the Akra. For him, this change in educational system symbolizes the destruction of the Jewish ancestral religion, and he is particularly violent toward Jews participating in the gymnasium. So, one of the things that we will cover a bit is the usage of the term barbarian. Now, of course, Greeks use barbarian to describe anyone who's non-Greek, but one of the rhetorical devices that the author of Second Maccabees uses is instead calling the Greeks barbarians.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That'll show them.
No.
Well, I'm going to go out on a limb here, and I'm going to say that probably it's not contemporary with the events, as you postulated earlier, if they're using the term Jew, which wasn't seen even in First Maccabees at all.
It was not.
Right. So I would say probably is not contemporary with the events.
Yeah, because it's written later in first usage of Jew, which you might think would pop up in First Maccabees.
You would think.
Yeah.
But no.
So, what is striking about this narrative, in fact, is that the Jews are not portrayed as seeking to set up an independent realm. Rather, the story ends with the Jews able to celebrate their religion in peace, not with political independence. Judas seems quite happy to live a settled life under the Seleucids. This is in sharp contrast to the outlook of the author of First Maccabees, who views all Seleucids with suspicion. And of course, he notes here that it has a distinctly Deuteronomistic flavor, which is, that's going to be accurate. So one of the things that I noted that was kind of important, So it's more about religious freedom than it is about political independence. So that was one of the big things here. And
Well, I would say in first Maccabees, like, there wasn't a strong tend towards political independence.
Well,
there was a lot of kissing asses and, like, paying heed to bigger nations.
Sure, but the thing is, it eventually led up to that political independence.
Right. Well, there was, like, political independence.
Yeah, because
right?
the thing is, they were revolting the whole time.
Right. But there's still, like, they sent out their letters to the Spartans, for example.
Yeah.
Right? They still depend on other nations.
Yeah, I mean, no one's saying you can't, they wouldn't be able to seek help from other nations or ally with other nations.
What I'm saying is it's not like the desert tribes in the Bible where they're a lot more strictly isolationist.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, because, the world has changed so
Yeah.
much at that point. So on the date, Doran notes, dates range from the 2nd century BCE to the 1st century CE. Perhaps since the text shows a friendly attitude towards the Romans, it might have been written before Pompey's entry into Jerusalem in 63 BCE. Mamigliano has suggested that the epitome was written to accompany the first prefixed letter. Therefore, the epitome would have been written in 124 BCE. Yet, because there's a date for it. Yet, although one can make connections between the prefix letters and the epitome, the author of the epitome makes no mention in his prologue that he was writing to accompany a letter.
All right.
Yeah. So
You want for me to get started on here?
I guess we can cover a few more things from an introduction here, and this
All right.
will be from Erdman's. Going to move this over here for a moment.
Yeah.
So on Textual Witnesses, of course, Goldstein does give a list
Mm-hmm.
on Textual Witnesses, and that's I think on page 127, did I say?
Yeah, it was somewhere around there.
Yeah, I think
Towards the end.
128, yeah. So 128 is where there's a list of those witnesses.
Mhm.
But on that, all modern texts and translations of 2nd Maccabees depend basically on Codex Alexandrinus and Codex Venetus. These are Greek manuscripts from the 5th and 8th centuries, respectively, descendants of the original Greek text of 2nd Maccabees. The Old Latin (OL) version is around the 2nd to 3rd centuries, and the Vulgate (VG) version, perhaps pre-Jerome, interesting, derived from the Greek, as does the Syriac translation. The Armenian translation has been influenced by the Latin tradition. And then he actually notes that for details on that, see Goldstein 124 to 28. So it should
Well,
be.
Goldstein says for the Armenian, see Hanhart's Hanhart's edition of the Greek text. But
We don't have that.
yeah, he says that his translation of 2nd Maccabees is based on the edition of Hanhart.
So the original book of the abbreviator or the epitomist consists of 2nd Maccabees 2:19 through 15:39, within which 3:1 through 15:37 is the epitomist's reworking of Jason's 5 volumes. Certain passages are clearly the epitomist's rather than Jason's work. The preface, the prologue, and probably several reflective comments, and we will note those as we go along. Possibly 12:43 through 45 and 14:37 through 47, together with the story of the 7 brothers and their mother, all emphasizing the resurrection belief come from the hand of the epitomist rather than from Jason. Goldstein thinks that the accounts of the deaths of Eliezer, the 7 brothers and their mother, and of Antiochus draw on a legendary source. Goldstein also proposes a source, the Memoirs of Onias, favoring the Oniad priesthood. The 4 letters preserved in 11:16 through 37 are clearly not from the hand of Jason or the epitomist. The letter credited to Antiochus in 9:19 through 27 may have been adapted or invented by the epitomist from an archival model. The two letters of, the first two letters in the first two chapters were prefixed from other sources at an early stage in the book's history. And Goldstein argues, admittedly inconclusively, that Jason wrote deliberately to contradict First Maccabees wherever possible, because it supported Hasmonean claims to royal and high priestly legitimacy.
So
Yeah,
we could postulate that this was written a little bit later, right?
I mean, yeah, I would think so.
So in
It's
retrospect, they're like, let's not embellish these guys as much as the first edition of
the
Maccabees.
perspective had this is just a different author writing from a completely different perspective.
Sure, so I'm saying their bias is totally shifted, right?
Sure, yeah. I mean,
It might not even be temporally reasoned. It might be politically reasoned for their shift in ideals. So whatever.
Yeah, one of the things we should keep in mind about ancient literature is much more geared toward propagandistic stuff than writings are now. Now, every single writer has a purpose, right? But it was much more apparent back then.
Can we talk a little bit about the divisions here?
Sure.
Goldstein, I'm not sure if somewhere in this block of text he says why, but his second section here, the second epistle,
Yeah, it ends halfway through.
right, it starts halfway through the first chapter,
Mm-hmm.
and it continues until the end of the second, halfway through the second chapter.
Yeah.
And then the second chapter continues after that. Well, why would they do that? Why wouldn't they just start the second epistle as the second chapter, or something that made sense?
Yeah, I don't know. I couldn't tell you. Wish I did.
Oof. All right. Well,
that's heretical. You can't question the ordering of these texts.
Yeah. So one of the notes here is he perhaps wrote not too long after Judas's death. This is in reference to Jason himself. So he perhaps wrote not too long after Judas's death in 161 BC. The date of the epitomist is even harder to assess. The first prefixed letter is dated to 124 BC, but Migliano's thesis that 2nd Maccabees was written to accompany this letter is not supported by any explicit reference from the author. Suggestions that Jason wrote to discredit or refute 1st Maccabees, including Goldstein, require a date after 1st Maccabees, whose date is itself uncertain. The views that the epitomist wrote against the policies of John Hyrcanus or Eunaeus, if correct, give no basis for any precise dating. The epitomist implies in 411 and 1537 that in his time, Jerusalem was not subject to any external power, which suggests a date before 63 BC, when Pompey captured Jerusalem. The epitomist wrote probably in Jerusalem, but possibly in Alexandria, between the publication of Jason's work and 63 BC.
all right. Well, why don't I hop into this? Because we haven't started yet.
Yeah, but now we have a whole bunch of stuff, and
Right.
a whole bunch of commentaries.
Context.
Good background information.
I think it's always important
We
to have
haven't
that.
cracked open the Hermenia yet, though.
No, but I did read some notes that I took from the introduction.
Okay. So this Epistle 1, a call to the Jews of Egypt to repent and observe the festival of tabernacles in the month of Kislev. To our brothers, the Jews of Egypt, greeting. Your brothers, the Jews in Jerusalem and in the land of Judah. A good peace may God make for you, and may he be good to you, and may he remember his covenant with his faithful servants to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So already dramatically different than First Maccabees, which never mentioned God.
Well, I think it did mention God at some point, didn't it? But it was very brief.
There might have been a brief mention. I think there were a couple of offhand, like indirect mentions, like stuff like they were good men who followed capital his commandments.
Sure. Okay.
Right. But I'm not sure. I don't recall there being an outright mention of God, but I may be wrong.
So on these verses that you're currently reading, they contain a series of 8 expressions of wish in the optative mood, arranged paratactically with the conjunction kai, which means and. The series appears to be divided into 2 parts. The first 4 expressions, verses 2 through 4a, begin with the optative, and I'm going to read some Greek here, and you might have to look at it to tell me what it means.
Why the fuck would you ask me?
Agapomsai?
Agapomsai?
Agapomsai? Apparently it begins with that expression. So whatever...
Agapomsai.
So whatever begins that, that's what it means. Which picks up on... Yeah, so which picks up on... This is... I don't even know what that letter is. Whatever, some more Greek stuff. In the first wish for well-being at the end of verse 1.
Oh, I think it comes from agape.
I have no idea.
Because that's what happened when I looked up agapomsai. It automatically corrected me to agape.
I doubt it.
Strange.
Yeah, but anyways, let's just continue then.
All right. May he give you all a heart to revere him and do his will wholeheartedly and with a willing spirit. May he open your heart to his Torah and to his commandments, and may he make peace. May he listen to your prayers and forgive you and not abandon you in an evil time. And now, here we continually offer prayers for you.
So here's something interesting about the Egyptian Jews in general. So the Egyptian Jews are to serve God, whose will is known through Moses' law, wholeheartedly and willingly, a phrase similar to that in 1 Chronicles, where David instructs his son Solomon to serve God. In contrast to that passage, however, the emphasis in the prayer before us is all on God's action. Verse 4 gives the same message as verse 3, but makes explicit the connection with the Torah and its ordinances. Instead of God's giving them a heart, God will open their hearts and minds, a phrase later used in Acts. Yeah, God is the one who grants peace.
Yeah. In the reign of Demetrius, in the year 169, we Jews wrote you, quote, in the affliction and in the distress which came upon us in the years from the time that Jason and his followers rebelled against the Holy Land and the kingdom, and set fire to the temple gateway, and shed innocent blood, we prayed to the Lord, and he hearkened to us. We brought animal sacrifices and fine flour, and we kindled the lamps and laid out the showbread, end quote.
So most scholars have been convinced that the authors are quoting here from a letter written in the year 169 of the Seleucid era. Bickerman provides examples where no hint is given that a quotation is being introduced. There has been considerable discussion over the precise reference of when Demetrius was king in the year 169. According to the Seleucid Macedonian calendar, year one fell between fall 312 and fall 311, while a Seleucid Babylonian calendar has been posited in which year one ran from spring 311 to 310. Following the Seleucid Macedonian reckoning, year 169 would be fall 144 or fall 143, while in the Seleucid Babylonian counting year, year 169 would be spring 143 or spring 142. So it's interesting to once again try to figure out which specific date that would be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Goldstein talks about the language that's used. I'll read a small bit of the commentary here. It says, to produce an unambiguous translation, one has to consider the patterns of biblical allusions in the letter. For our historical information is too scanty to decide the issue. Both Jason's force and the Seleucid army shed innocent blood. Callisthenes burned the gates, and is nowhere identified as a follower of Jason. In the affliction and in the distress might come from the generalizing context describing punishments, Deuteronomy 28, 53, 55, 57, to which, however, there is no further allusion in the letter. Hence, our phrase probably comes from the other possibility, the specific context of sin and punishment at Jeremiah 19:9. At Jeremiah 19:4, the sins of the Jews which incurred the punishment of Judah and Jerusalem are identified. Included are the acts of leaders of Judah who deserted God and rendered foreign the chosen place and shed innocent blood. All three sins were committed by the Jews of the party of Jason the Oniad. The priests among them deserted the temple. Our letter goes on in verse 8 to mention the shedding of innocent blood. Hence, we may conclude that the subject of the verbs set fire and shed remains Jason and his followers. The temporal clause refers to the sinners who caused the distress, and the main clause begins with the verbs which are in the first person telling of the proprietary acts of the righteous senders.
So, did you already read verse 8?
Yes.
Okay.
Wait. Yes, I've finished verse 8.
Okay. So we can definitely talk a little bit more about this this section.
Wait. I'm not sure. Verse 8 starts in the middle of a sentence.
Oh, okay. You can go ahead and finish that then.
So, Jason and his followers rebelled against the Holy Land and the kingdom and set fire to the temple gateway and shed innocent blood. We prayed to the Lord. He hearkened to us. We brought animal sacrifices and fine flour. We kindled the lamps and laid out the showbread. Okay, so yes, I did read verse 8. But this is a pretty common Jewish thing. The showbread, the lamps, right?
Yeah, definitely.
So to this day, the Jews light their candles and eat their challah, right? On their Passover. And the matzah during Passover, the challah during Shabbat.
Matzah sucks.
Matzah is the worst.
It's so bad.
I
The soup
genuinely...
and the balls, the
No.
bread,
Have you ever just had matzah?
the bread.
Yeah, it's bread.
crackers.
It's really bland
It's
And
really bad.
and it's flat.
It's flat. It
And
has
they make
no
it into
flavor.
balls and
It's
put
disgusting.
it in soup because it's so flat.
It's really flaky.
taste.
Yeah.
So like
Never had it.
whenever you try to eat it,
Oh, wait, no, I've had it
falls
outside of
apart.
it. It is bad. Oh my gosh, it's like cardboard. You're right.
Yeah, it sucks.
it's absolutely terrible.
Anyways, so on this, let's get back to the reading.
Yeah.
So,
Oh yeah, happy Passover, by the
Oh
way.
yeah, thanks. My grandparents wished me a happy Passover.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I'm sure they're staying kosher for Passover by not eating leavened bread.
They're not going anywhere. They are just staying inside their home and just not going out because coronavirus. Anyways, so 1:7 through 8 appear to quote a letter written in the year 169 that is probably, at least according to Erdmans, 143 BC, when the Jews were subjects of Demetrius II, and before they dated documents by Simon. Of course, we learned that in 1 Maccabees. In this letter, they had referred to the first celebration of Hanukkah, the lamp lighting of 1/8, after the troubles brought about by Jason's revolt, quote, from the Holy Land and the kingdom. This letter saw Jason primarily as a religious apostate. You can cross-reference 2 Maccabees 4, 7 through 13. We'll get to that.
We'll get to it.
Yeah, where he says, ungodly and no true priest. Jason's burning of the gate in 1 Maccabees, and bloodshed probably refer to the events of 2 Maccabees 5. After this quotation and flashback to the time of Jason, 1:9 comes to the point. And now, a regular formal feature of Hebrew correspondence in the year 188, the Egyptian Jews are to keep the festival of booths in the month Chislev.
It says, and now we ask you to celebrate the days of tabernacles in the month of Kislev in the year 188.
Yeah. Though held in mid-December, the celebration of the Temple of Purification took on features of the Autumn Festival of Tabernacles or Booths. So there is, we're going to get into it in a little bit, but there was, as noted, a conflation for these. And I'll actually note that in just a second here. But a little bit more on the Egyptian Jews that I thought was really interesting. Jewish mercenaries had settled in Upper Egypt as early as the 6th century BCE, and by the 5th century had their own temple at Elephantine. Jewish captives had settled in Lower Egypt from the time of the first Ptolemies, and in the mid-2nd century, Onias IV, son of high priest Onias III, built a Jewish temple at Leontopolis in the Delta region. The existence of this latter temple, highly irregular from the viewpoint of the Jerusalem hierarchy, may provide important background for the first letter.
Mm-hmm. I also want to say that you said about this section, or at least the book said about this section, now we ask you in the year 188 to such and such and such. Well, Goldstein says the date is surely meant to be the date of the letter, not the date of the festival, which was obvious to the recipients. Both in Greek and in Aramaic letters, the date, if given, customarily appears at the end.
So let's see if Doran notes this. He does, actually. So in the year 188, Bickerman, Abel, and Schwartz connect the genitive of the year to the preceding month of Kislev. Schwartz argued that normally the date of a letter gives the day in the dative with the month and year in the genitive, as in, and actually cites some other verses here, like in chapter 11. Since he had previously argued in his comment on 1:7 that the letter was written in 169, he concluded that Seleucid era, by the way, he concluded that the year date given here could not be 188 Seleucid era, but must be 148, which is found in some manuscripts. The Jews in Egypt are therefore being asked to celebrate the days of booths of the month of Kislev of the year 148. Schwartz provides no Hellenistic parallel to this way of referring to a festival. Just as I argued above on formal grounds that 1:7 could not provide the date of the letter, so too here, in agreement with Goldstein, I propose that the date placed at the end of the letter is meant to be the date of the letter. Mm-hmm. When the date of a letter is given, normally the year in the genitive comes first, followed by the month, and then the day. I suggest that in transmission, the year was kept, but not the day and month. On formal grounds, since the letter is quoting a letter from 169 Seleucid era, the date must be 188 Seleucid era. The year 188 of the Seleucid Macedonian era would run from the 9th of October, 125, to the 27th of September, 124 of the Seleucid Babylonian era, from the 5th of April 124 to the 25th of March 123, as the letter calls upon the Egyptian Jews to celebrate in the month of Kislev, November through December. According to the Seleucid Macedonian era, it could have been written in 125 or 124, whereas according to the Seleucid Babylonian era, it would have to be written in 124, as I have argued above that the date in verse 7 is according to the Seleucid Babylonian reckoning. I would hold that here too the date is according to Seleucid Babylonian reckoning. No farewell formula is found at the end of this letter, but this absence is not unusual.
All right. So this next letter that we're getting into, the text of Epistle 2 is difficult and seems to contain gaps and corruptions. The preserver of the text may have been able to find only a tattered copy of old propaganda pieces, or perhaps here again we have an example of how material at the head of a scroll could suffer damage.
Well,
Epistle 2 cannot be what it claims to be. A letter of the Jews in Jerusalem and Judea, the Council of Elders, and Judas sent to the Jews of Egypt after the death of Antiochus IV and before 25 Kislev.
Well, one of the things I want to know before we hop into this one is the conflation of the celebration here.
Mm-hmm.
The Feast of Booths, Sukkot, was celebrated in the 7th month of Tishri, not the 9th month of Kislev, as the author here states. Only here, and at 2 Maccabees 1:18 and 10:6, is a connection made between the Feast of Booths and Hanukkah, the festival in Kislev to celebrate the rededication of the temple. Hanukkah is said to last for 8 days. According to 2 Chronicles, the dedication of Solomon's temple, celebrated in conjunction with booths, followed this model. Although in 1 Kings 8, Solomon sends the people away on the 8th day. The returning exiles followed it also when they celebrated booths in Nehemiah. So all of these connotations combine to allow the feast in the 9th month, Kislev, to be called the Feast of Sukkot. The date is given at the end of the letter, yeah.
All right. So like the other letter, Goldstein says there's some evidence that Epistle 2 is translated from a Hebrew original. First Esdras, the Greek Esther, and even Josephus's Antiquities demonstrate how Hebrew could be rendered into idiomatic literary Greek. A writer of the Hebrew would be more likely to be found in Judea, but we cannot exclude the possibility that one existed in Egypt. On the other hand, the conditions of the crisis of late 103 BCE could well have made it difficult to send the letter from Judea to Egypt. We may guess, then, that the author wrote in Egypt. Perhaps he was a descendant of Aristobulus, the addressee.
Mm-hmm.
He also talks a bit about Elias Bickerman and
Yeah.
how great he is.
Yeah.
But basically, Goldstein goes into depth saying how this letter is totally illegitimate, and like if it was legitimate, it would be phrased completely differently. I'm not going to go into all of the depth that he does, but he I'll give you a little sample here. For example, there's a bit here. If Epistle 2 had truly been a public letter that reached Egypt before Epistle 1, Epistle 1 would have alluded to it, not to the obscure Epistle 0. One may plead that Aristobulus, to whom Epistle 2 is addressed, for some reason refrained from publishing it in 164, but there is no visible reason why Jews living under Ptolemy the 6th in 164 should not celebrate a Seleucid defeat. So why would Aristobulus have held the letter back from circulation? Moreover, Epistle 2 tells the Jews of Egypt how to pray and seems to offer them consolation. If so, Epistle 2 implies that the addressees, the Jews of Egypt, were in distress in 164 BC. There's no evidence whatever that the Jews under Ptolemaic rule were menaced in late 164 and early 163 BC. If our evidence were more complete, these facts too would make it impossible that Epistle 2 is authentic. However, the hints in 1:26 through 28 and 2:18 that the Jews of Egypt are in trouble are vague, and the struggles then between Ptolemy the sixth and his younger brother, the future Ptolemy the seventh, could have made all Ptolemaic subjects fear the future. It goes on like that.
So
yeah.
One of the interesting things here is about the length of the letter as well. So while the length of the first letter is known from the initial greeting and the concluding date in 1:9, the extent of the second letter is quite problematic. At 1:18, the letter seems about to end with an exhortation. Good job. About to end with an exhortation to the addressees to celebrate the purification of the temple on the 25th day of the month of Kislev. But it then suddenly launches into an extended apologetic on the holiness of the second temple. At 2:16, one finds almost exactly the same phrase as at 1:18. We shall celebrate the purification. No concluding date is given to the letter.
All right. Now,
more difficult to solve would be the chronology involved. If Antiochus the Fourth died between November 20th and December 18th, 164, near Isfahan, how could the news of his death have reached Jerusalem in time for the council to convene a meeting, draft this letter, and then send it to Egypt so that it would reach there before mid-December 164, the 25th of Kislev? Even if one dates the events to 165, the problem still remains. Scholars have attempted to solve this difficulty by suggesting they've attempted to solve this difficulty by suggesting that the letter was written so that the Egyptian Jews would celebrate the anniversary of the first Feast of Purification. But the language of 1:18, following on the account of Antiochus' death, suggests rather a first celebration. The most likely solution is that this letter was not written by Judas and his followers, but is an attempt by some later writer to show that two well-known Jewish contemporaries, Judas Maccabeus and Aristobulus, had dealings with each other.
All right. I'm going to hand this off to you at the second chapter.
Sure, yeah.
Even though it's halfway through this section.
Yeah.
All right. Epistle 2, a forged letter to the Egyptian Jews purporting to have been written in 164 BCE. The people in Jerusalem and in Judea, and the council of elders and Judas to Aristobulus, tutor of King Ptolemy and member of the stock of the anointed priests, and to the Jews in Egypt.
So here's
greeting and wishes for health.
Amazing. So fragments of the works of a Jewish author named Aristobulus, who presented a work to Ptolemy the Sixth Philometer, are known from the later Christian writer Eusebius. Aristobulus argued that Greek authors like Homer and Hesiod were dependent on the wisdom contained in the Torah. The author of this letter calls Aristobulus a tutor of the Ptolemaic king and an Aaronid. The prestige of Judas is thus enhanced by connecting him with such a respected figure.
All right. Having been saved by God from great perils, we thank him greatly as befits men who war against a king. For God himself cast away those who made war on the holy city. Indeed, when the commander and the apparently irresistible army accompanying him came to Persis, they were massacred in the temple of Nanaya through the trickery of Naniah's priests.
So
Who's Naniah?
So first of all, the term unstoppable is used to describe the army of Philip V of Macedon and that of Antiochus III when speaking of their attacks on temples. The author of the condensed version has Antiochus IV attempt to pillage the temple in Persepolis, but 1 Maccabees 6:1-4 and Josephus have Antiochus IV menace the temple in Elymais.
Okay, so yeah, the temple of Naniah, the temple was in Elymais, biblical Elam. Naniah was a goddess of Mesopotamian origin.
Mm-hmm.
The Greeks identified her with Aphrodite and Artemis.
Yep. A dedicatory inscription found at Piraeus from the Roman period names her Artemis Nanai.
Mm.
Okay, neat.
Cool. Antiochus came with his friends. It's capitalized. They're talking about the friends of the king, right? To the shrine, intending to marry the goddess and thereby acquire the money in her rich treasury as dowry.
Yes, so marrying the goddess. Now, the marriage of a king to a goddess was an ancient ritual. Apparently, this happens quite a bit in the ancient world.
Yeah, I know that there was some Ishtar marriage, right? But very strange.
And apparently, there are plenty of different accounts about this stuff too. We already know.
Well,
one of
it
them.
still happens to this day, right? Like the nuns in the Catholic tradition, right? They're considered to be married to God.
Are they?
I'm pretty sure.
Something like that. It might not be exactly like that.
But I mean, I'm sure it's not like they get a dowry, right? But
yeah. So one of the things that we mentioned before was about those attacks on those separate cities here. So the author of this account mentions the temple is that of Nania, a goddess of fertility, which is similar to Polybius's account. In Polybius's version, Antiochus makes an expedition against the temple of Artemis in Elymais, but is foiled by the local tribes and dies while retreating. Polybius states that some say Antiochus was smitten with madness and that there were manifestations of divine displeasure at his attempt on the sanctuary. What is interesting is how different the account in this letter is from that in 2 Maccabees 2:19-27. In that chapter, the author describes Antiochus' attempt to rob the temples in Persepolis. The people resist and Antiochus retreats. At Ecbatana, Antiochus learns of Judas's success, rushes to return to defeat the Jews, but dies on the journey when he is smitten by an incurable disease. One cannot reconcile these accounts. The places are different, the manner of death is different. One must conclude, therefore, that this letter and the epitome were produced independently of each other.
all right. The priests of Naniah's temple set the money before him, and Antiochus came with a few of his men into the precinct of the shrine. As soon as Antiochus had entered, the priests locked the temple, opening the secret trap door in the coffered ceiling. They rained stones down upon the thunderstruck commander. After dismembering and beheading the corpses, they threw them out to the men outside. In every way blessed is our God, who delivered over the evildoers. I don't think that was your God.
It's gravity.
It sounds like you flipped a switch, a bunch of rocks fell from the ceiling and killed them because you put a bunch of rocks there to fall down when you flip a switch. That's not God. That's you murdering them. Inasmuch as we are about to celebrate on the 25th of Kislev the purification of the temple, we thought we ought to let you know so that you too might celebrate it as days of tabernacles and days of the fire, as when Nehemiah, the builder of the temple and the altar, brought sacrifices.
Yeah, so there's going to be a lot of allusions to other characters in in the Tanakh, basically.
All right.
So-
yeah, I see that there's quite a few references to Nehemiah.
Nehemiah,
this
Solomon. There's going to be a whole bunch of them. So interesting for the very first verse here. For verse 18, I should say. Verse 18 is very difficult to translate, as the Greek is very elliptical and requires that something be added to the text to make it intelligible. But anyways, on the stuff that we were referencing here, these people like Nehemiah and Solomon, the author attempts to provide precedents for celebrating the purification of the temple under Judas Maccabeus, and therefore connects it both to the Feast of Booths and Sukkot, the Feast of Booths / Sukkot, during which Solomon dedicated the temple, and to Nehemiah, whose reign, during whose reign, can't speak English, the festival was reinstituted. So it's actually kind of interesting to figure out which Nehemiah they're talking about. And here,
because Nehemiah from Nehemiah
is a different one than the Nehemiah mentioned in Ezra. Yeah, it was a little bit later. The Nehemiah from Nehemiah.
Yeah.
So there are 3 possible ones, but two of them are conflated here. So the first one was a leader of the Jewish community who returned to Judea with Zerubbabel at the end of the Babylonian exile, shortly after 538 BCE. And another one was Nehemiah, son of Hakaliah, the central figure in the book of Nehemiah, who began his reform activity in Jerusalem in 445 BCE. The reference here is to the person last mentioned, as 2 Maccabees 1:20 refers to his being commissioned by the king of the Persians. However, this figure is to be conflated with the first Nehemiah, as 2 Maccabees 1:20 presumes the condition of the first exile. This conflation was probably helped by the opening scene in Nehemiah 1:1-3, which, set in the month of Kislev, describes a destruction of Jerusalem.
Okay.
So I just thought that was interesting.
Yeah. When our forefathers were being carried off to Persia, the pious priests of that time secretly took some fire from the altar and hid it in a pit, which was like a dry well, and shut it up securely so that the place remained unknown to all.
So the fire.
Fire.
It's a very important symbol of God's power.
But I got to point out that if you put fire in an airtight pit, and then you seal off the pit,
fire's going to be put out.
Yeah, it's not going to last. It's no way.
Yeah.
Not possible.
Yeah. So I mentioned...
That's why it's divine fire right there, guys.
Oh,
wow.
Yeah. I mentioned how important fire was, because you have, the Israelites followed that pillar of fire, right, in the wilderness.
Mm-hmm.
There was the whole thing with Elijah.
In the burning bush.
Yeah, the burning bush too. Also, God, there's so much. One of my favorites is the heavenly fire, when people are sent to go. I forget if it was Elijah or Elisha, but I think it was Elijah, right? Where people were sent to go get him, and he lights them up with heavenly fire.
The burning sword that guards Eden. There's that. And
There's
then
quite a few burning
fire
swords.
and brimstone from any time that it was summoned from the sky. It's one of the most potent weapons, apparently.
Yeah, but this is just a way to establish the holiness of the temple.
All right. So many years went by, and then in God's own time, Nehemiah received his commission from the king of Persia and sent the descendants of the priests who had hidden the fire to recover it. When they reported that, ...
What verse is that?
21.
Okay, I'll check that.
I'm going to check it too.
Oh, are you?
Yeah. As it might just be a Goldstein thing.
It might just be a Goldstein thing, but he actually does have a note here. Wilhelm, another scholar, has rightly argued that the general description taton dosion, the elements of the sacrifices, is not to be connected with the verb next day. And so translated, when the elements of the sacrifice were brought/placed. But that this general description is specified by the mention of wood and other things necessary for the sacrifice, and is governed by the verb ekelesen. The subject of was brought is the liquid of the previous verse that Nehemiah had commanded be brought.
Which hasn't happened yet in our reading.
Yeah.
But this it is a Goldstein thing. The Greek text, Hos diasaphasan hemen me heru kenai pure, is literally, when they reported to us not to have found fire. The author certainly did not imagine the senders as contemporaries of Nehemiah. Probably the text is slightly corrupt.
Yeah, so you said it was for verse 21, right?
21. Yeah, it says, when they reported that ... they had found no fire but a viscous liquid.
Yes, that viscous liquid. That's what was being brought. So one of the things about that liquid and that I thought was kind of interesting, maybe Doran goes into it a little bit in the Hermenia commentary. So the thick liquid, or naphtha, a kind of petroleum, was well known to Hellenistic scientists and geographers. A plausible etymology shows that the word derives from the Persian naft, or neftar. So yeah, that actually would make neftar an adaptation of the Hebrew word tohorah.
So this is petroleum.
Pretty much.
All right.
So I'm going to check this commentary for that.
Nehemiah ordered them to draw it up and bring it to him. After the sacrificial offerings had been placed upon the altar, Nehemiah ordered the priests to sprinkle the liquid over the firewood and over the offerings laid upon it.
Yeah, it actually it's called neftar later, but we'll get to that.
Yeah. When that had been done, after a while, the sun, which had been covered up by clouds, began to shine, and a great fire blazed up to the astonishment of all. So their petroleum caught fire.
And they were astonished.
Well, I guess if they've never seen petroleum before.
Yeah. And actually, interestingly, Nehemiah here is kind of being portrayed as the inventor of it.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's more that they found it.
Sure. No, you're right. Yeah.
You guys remember during that Baal priests battle?
Yeah.
I totally bet they used the same stuff to start the fire. They're like, pour even more water on it. It's not water, guys. It's petroleum, or what's this substance called now?
Again,
a thick liquid.
Nephthar.
Yeah, it's got nephthar in it. It's not water or whatever.
Yeah. As the sacrifice was being consumed, the priests and the whole assemblage uttered a prayer, in which Jonathan led, and the rest, following Nehemiah, responded. The prayer was as follows: Lord, Lord, God, creator of all, awesome and powerful and just and merciful, our sole good King, our sole provider, the sole just one, who is almighty and eternal, the preserver of Israel from every evil, the one who chose and sanctified the patriarchs, accept our sacrifice for the sake of all your people Israel, and guard your portion and make it holy.
So one of the things about this is references Jonathan, right? Beforehand? Before the prayer? Jonathan. Yeah, Jonathan led off.
Jonathan led the prayer.
Yeah. So the reference to Jonathan may be to either the high priest named Jonathan, mentioned at Nehemiah 12:11, or to Mattaniah, quote, who was the player to begin the thanksgiving and prayer. And that's also in Nehemiah. That's 11:17. Since both names mean God's gift in Hebrew. but one cannot be certain about which Jonathan is intended.
Okay. Gather together our dispersion. Free those who are enslaved among the nations. Look upon those who have been despised and abominated, and let the nations know that you are our God. Put to torment the oppressors and the arrogant perpetrators of outrage. Plant your people in your holy place, as Moses said. The priests went on singing hymns to the accompaniment of lyres. When the sacrificial offerings had been consumed, Nehemiah ordered that they pour the remaining liquid to ... large boulders.
Before I check on that verse, so in verse 29, the prayer concludes with a further nod to the Exodus narrative. The language is closest to Exodus 15:17 with its terminology of planting and holy place. However, Moses' promise of return from diaspora on the condition of repentance is found in Deuteronomy 30:1-5. So what verse was the ... in?
I've got a thing for it. Let me just finish this part.
Sure.
To ... large boulders. As soon as the command was carried out, a flame blazed up, and when the fire on the altar lit up in turn ... was consumed. So Goldstein says about this, the Greek is ungrammatical and difficult to understand. A literal translation would be, as the sacrificial offerings were consumed, Nehemiah ordered to pour the remaining liquid to larger stones. As soon as this was done, a flame blazed up, and when the fire on the altar lit up in turn, it was consumed. What is the connection of the larger stones with the rest of the first sentence? What are they larger than? What is the antecedent of it in the second sentence? Grammatically and logically, the antecedent cannot be the fire on the altar. There may be a further difficulty. In later verses, the author implies that Nehemiah used the liquid for some act of purification. Should there not be some reference to purification in these verses? Perhaps. But it is also possible that the author was constrained by his convictions to speak of purification instead of dedication. To return to other problems of these two verses, Greek sometimes uses the comparative adjective in the sense of very. Larger stones could be very large stones, and hence comes my translation large boulders. To make a good sense of verse 31, one need only assume that the word epi, upon, has been lost before large boulders. However, we must also take note of the author's effort to have the wonder in the time of Nehemiah come close to Elijah's miracle at Mount Carmel. The miraculous flames in the time of Elijah devoured the stones of the altar, 1 Kings 18:38. It would have been a bad omen indeed if the new altar of Zerubbabel Nehemiah had been destroyed by the rediscovered fire. On the other hand, the event would be all more wondrous if the flames devoured stones even larger than the stones of the altar. In the Greek of the second sentence, it was consumed, is one word, edapeneth. It has been added in my translation above because English grammar requires the word. Apparently, the subject of was consumed has been lost. It would be very easy to restore as the subject the remaining liquid or the stones in the remaining liquid. If so, in telling the story in this manner, the author of Epistle 2 achieved his desire, close approach to Elijah's miracle. Fire wondrously blazes up on the altar and consumes the remaining petroleum at the same time as a petroleum fire nearby consumes large stones.
So on that, so Katz restored Epi, maintaining that the corruption was due to haplography, which basically they would have mistaken a letter. He also said that the absence of epi in a translated Greek text would be a Hebraism. I agree that epi should be added. The Syriac and part of the Lucianic tradition interpret the text so that Nehemiah commands that the place be covered with large stones, which does not fit the context.
All right. The news of the phenomenon spread. The king of the Persians received the report that the liquid had been found in the place where the priests, being led into exile, had hidden the fire, and that by means of it Nehemiah and his followers had burned the sacrificial offerings.
Did chapter 2 start yet?
No.
Okay.
After
I had that up forever.
No. Well, it's still chapter 1. It's the second
letter.
epistle.
Oh, okay.
Sacrificial offerings. After verifying the phenomenon, the king had the place fenced in and declared it holy. The king took large sums of money and distributed them to Nehemiah and his followers. Nehemiah and his followers called the liquid nephthar, which means purification, but is commonly called nephthai.
Yeah, so the note on on that, Greek writers such as Dioscorides and Plutarch use the term naphtha or naphtha when describing this substance. All kinds of suggestions have been made to explain the form found in the manuscripts for this verse. For example, nephdai or nephdar. In some of the Midrashic literature, the Hebrew reads something I can't say, but that I can't read, but it's vocalized as neft. In Persian, the word is naft. In Akkadian, naptu. Goldstein argues that the loss of final R was common in Hebrew and Aramaic, and in Greek transcriptions from Aramaic.
Yeah,
However,
it's common in English too.
Yeah. However, this description does not account for the final I, or iota. No satisfactory answer has been given for the translation. So for the translation, purification.
All right. Well, that is not the end of the second epistle, but it is the end of the first chapter. So I'm going to hand it off to you, and I will...
Yeah, you can go ahead and take all this stuff.
I will
There's
be
quite a bit of
right
it here.
back. I hydrated way too much.
You hydrated too much? Oh. Well, you know what? Take these commentaries and feel bad that you gotta read all these. God, there's so much. Let's see if I missed anything from this section though.
Yes.
No, I guess that can be covered afterwards. All right, so I'm just going to start the reading here. Let's see. Chapter 2. In our documents, we find that it was Jeremiah the prophet who commanded those who were being led into exile to take some of the fire, as we have just told you. They also show that the prophet gave the Torah to those who were being led into exile and admonished them not to forget the Lord's commandments and not to let their minds be led astray when they saw gold and silver images and the ornaments upon them. So I guess they would have seen this amazing thing and then just would have become greedy, and that would have led their mind astray. With other words to the same effect, he exhorted them not to let the Torah depart from their hearts. We are now starting verse 4, by the way.
We're starting verse 4, huh?
Yeah.
Well, all right.
Okay. The text also said that the prophet, on receiving a divine revelation, ordered that the tabernacle and the ark should go with him. It went on to say that Jeremiah went out to the mountain which Moses ascended to see the heritage promised by God.
So, Sinai?
Or no, it was it Sinai or was it a different one?
He went up on Sinai.
He went up on a different mountain too. All right.
Well, it's vague there anyway.
But if they're talking about heritage, it could be the land of Canaan, or it could be just the Torah stuff in general. So that it could be Sinai.
Let me see. What verse is that?
That's verse 4.
Verse 4.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to look through this.
Sure. There, Jeremiah found a cave chamber and brought into it the tabernacle and the ark and the incense altar and blocked up the entrance. Some of those who had come along went back to mark the path, but they could not find it. When Jeremiah found it, he rebuked them, saying, "The place will remain unknown until God gathers his people together in the age of mercy. At that time the Lord will bring these things to light again, and the glory of the Lord and the cloud will be seen." It's interesting, of the glory of the Lord and the cloud.
Yeah, so there's a ritual incense. The Hermenia commentary points it out. The Eerdmans commentary says that they're doing rededications under Nehemiah. There's links with the rededication of the temple that had happened previously under Nehemiah and Solomon. The Hermenia commentary says that it's this incense that gets brought in. It gets referenced in Exodus. It's supposed to be a curtain over the ark.
Definitely remember that.
Was there something you found on verse 4 about the heritage?
Yeah, not really. I mean, not really. About this stuff, it says 4Q385 reports only that the vessels of the house of God were taken to Babylon.
That's the 385th manuscript to come out of Cave 4 at Qumran.
Yes.
Bam.
Repeats what's found in
Notation.
Second Chronicles 36:18 and First Esdras 154. The inventories of articles taken from the temple that are given in 2 Kingdoms 25:13 through 17, 2 Chronicles 36:18, and Jeremiah 52:17 through 23 do not mention the ark, the tent, and the tablets of the law. According to 4th Ezra, the ark was plundered, the holy things polluted, like we talked about, the ark being plundered.
Mm-hmm.
Eupolemus has Jeremiah. Eupolemus has Jeremiah withhold the ark and the tablets within it. The Paralipomena of Jeremiah has Jeremiah and Baruch hand over the vessels of the temple service, which swallows them. And Jeremiah also throws away the keys of the temple of the sun. In 2nd Baruch, an angel assigns to the earth the veil, the holy ephod, the mercy seat, the 2 tablets, the holy raiment of the priests, the altar of incense, the 48 precious stones of the priests, and all the holy vessels of the tabernacles. All these stories maintain the hope of renewal in the future. 2 Maccabees 2:4 is the only place where the tent and the ark are said to be hidden by Jeremiah, since 2 Chronicles 36:18 had stated that all the vessels of the temple were taken to Babylon, whereas 1 Kingdoms 8:4 and 2 Chronicles 5:5 had stated that besides the holy vessels, the priests also took the ark and the tent of witness and placed them in the temple of Solomon. The author may be implying that the tent and the ark were not taken to Babylon.
Yeah, they were saved.
Yeah. By doing so, the author links what Jeremiah is doing to the actions of Solomon and Moses. That's all he says about verse 4. And then he talks about verse 5 in the incense.
Oh, okay. Anyways, so let's continue with this little speech here. As they were over Moses and as Solomon too requested, in order that the place should be greatly sanctified. We are also told that Solomon, in his wisdom, offered a sacrifice in honor of the dedication and completion of the temple. That was a pretty big sacrifice.
Yeah.
Just as Moses prayed to the Lord, and fire came down from heaven and devoured the sacrifices, so Solomon prayed, and fire came down and consumed the burnt offerings. And then, I don't know if you have something more complete about verses 10, 11, and 12, but apparently there's a lot of dots in here.
That might be a Goldstein thing. He's been putting that. I noticed in Second Maccabees that he's been doing it for places where he posits something might be corrupt.
Gotcha. Okay. I mean, maybe the Hermenia commentary has something on it because they're usually pretty good.
Hermenia should have, if I remember correctly. Yeah, it doesn't have dots in its translation.
It doesn't, but for 10, 11, and 12, the textual commentary is actually right next to the commentary on its own translation.
Yeah, 10, 11, and 12 have nothing.
Well, they're lettered, and then you have to find the letter. So they might.
Yeah, they're not lettered.
Huh. That's kind of weird.
There's no, like, head note or footnote on any of those verses.
And I can't even really find verse 9 in Goldstein's commentary.
It says that the referent of verse 10 and 11 would be the 8-day ordination ritual of Leviticus 8 through 9, which inaugurates the sacrificial worship of the Israelites.
Okay. Yeah, so Solomon prayed, and the fire came down and consumed the burnt offerings, ... And Moses said, on account of blank, the sin offering blank was consumed. Blank. There are four of those.
That's awful.
That he's suggesting something was corrupted. So too, Solomon celebrated the 8 days. The same account is given also in the records and the memoirs of the time of Nehemiah, and also that Nehemiah founded a library and collected the books about the kings and those of prophets and the books of David and the letters of Persian kings on dedicatory gifts to the temple. And I think this one actually probably has a note.
Yeah, what verses were those?
That was verse 13, actually. So 13 and 14. In the same manner, Judas reassembled for us the books scattered in the course of the recent war. And
Tell me when you finish 15.
Okay. And we have them. If you have need of them, send messengers to fetch them.
Are you at the end of 15?
Yes.
Okay, so so there's these Memoirs of Nehemiah.
Mm-hmm.
This commentary says that it refers to Nehemiah 1 through 7 and 11 through 13. If you remember, those were in the first person narrative back when we read them. Remember?
I don't remember the first person narrative, but I remember reading
Oh,
it.
yeah. It was really weird because we hadn't run into first person narrative in the Bible before then.
Sure.
Yeah, it says, these memoirs, however, do not refer to some of the events mentioned or alluded to in 2 Maccabees 1 through 2, such as the building of the temple, the finding of the fire, or the construction of the library. After Seleucus I founded the great library in Alexandria, other kings, particularly the Attalids at Pergamon, followed suit. The author is thus attributing to Nehemiah what at one time expected a ruler to do in Hellenistic times. The author places in Nehemiah's library books about the kings and prophets, David's works, and the letters of kings about votive offerings. There's been much discussion about the precise reference here. Do the books about the kings refer to 1 Samuel through 2 Kings? The prophets from Isaiah to Malachi, with the possible exception of Daniel? David's works to the Psalms, and the king's letters to those contained in Ezra and Nehemiah? The finds at Qumran have shown us that such equations are not so neat, and that many works were available in the 2nd century about which we know little today. For example, Eupolemus tells us that Moses and Joshua were prophets, and that provides letters exchanged between Solomon and the king of Tyre and Sidon about supplies for building the temple. Non-canonical psalms have been found at Qumran as well, so it's best not to make too precise an identification of what Nehemiah's library contained. In 1 Maccabees 1:56 through 57, the author describes how books of the law were torn to pieces and burned if found, whereas here the author notes how some had been hidden away from the persecutors. Judas, therefore, is cast as restoring the work of Nehemiah. And so, with the connection between Judas and Nehemiah, we return to the theme started in 118.
I actually ended up finding the commentary for 9 through 12 on the textual notes.
Yeah.
The text is clearly defective. It is hard to see the connection between verse 11 and verse 10 and verse 12. Verse 11 quotes Moses, but nowhere in the Torah is the quoted sentence to be found. The quoted sentence itself is enigmatic. Literally, the Greek has, on account of not having been eaten, the sin offering was consumed. Yeah, that's real weird. Verse 11. Okay, so I guess because they didn't eat it, they figured that they should. So verse 11 appears to be referring to the problem of the sin offering at Leviticus 10:16 through 20, but in its present form, the quoted sentence makes no sense when applied to the passage. At Leviticus 10:16 through 20, Aaron and his surviving sons did not eat the meat of the sin offering, but let it be burned. And Moses objected to the fact and accepted Aaron's explanation that as a mourner, he could not eat the meat. Verse 12 begins with the Greek word hosatos, in the same manner. Logically, an act comparable to Solomon's 8-day celebration should proceed. So, sacrifice the stuff, eat it, have your offerings or whatever. Anyways.
On these books, Eerdmans says the Memoirs of Nahum presumably are a book of Nehemiah in some form. The books about the kings and prophets may be 1st and 2nd Kings and the writings of David, the Psalms, but the letters of the kings about votive offerings remains unidentified, possibly the Persian documents preserved in Ezra 1 through 7.
Let's continue.
Yeah, tell me when you get to the end of 17 and we'll talk a bit about the dating.
Okay. As we said, we write you inasmuch as we are about to celebrate the purification. Please celebrate the days. God, who saved his entire people and restored the heritage to us all, blank, also blank, the kingdom and the priesthood and the sanctification. So I'm going to go find that. That was the end of verse 17, by the way.
Okay.
Yeah.
Blank.
Blank.
Yeah. So on that specifically, he basically just says that the text is difficult, and so who saved blank us all? See Zechariah 8:7 and 12 in a context of the regathering of dispersed Israel from the east and the west, Egypt, to secure Jerusalem. Also cross-reference Isaiah. The author, in using the word entire, might have in mind the remote past, but the reference to restoration and also the end of verse 18 show that he is thinking primarily of recent events. He doesn't actually say that much about the translation. He says that the text is difficult as the particle God, for, as a coordinating conjunction, shows a new clause begins with we hope. As the Greek text stands, the rest of verses 17 through 18, God blank Torah, or just God and then ends with Torah, is left without a verb. Greek often omits the present tense of the verb to be, and therefore one might translate the passage, it is God who has saved his entire people. Yeah, it is God who saved his entire people and restored the heritage to us all, and the kingdom and the priesthood and the sanctification as he promised in the Torah. After that declaration, however, the 4 of the next clause would follow strangely. How could the present pious hopes of the Jews of Judea explain God's past accomplishments? So yeah, it just is weird. Wouldn't totally make sense with the tense. So that's why he did that.
All right. Why don't you read verse 18 too?
Yes. As he promised in the Torah, for we hope in God that he will speedily have mercy upon us and gather us together from the lands under the heavens to his holy place. For he has indeed delivered us from great evils and has purified his place.
So it's interesting to note that no conclusion is given to the letter. That is the end of the letter.
Yep.
Now let's talk about the dating. If this letter is authentic, it belongs to the period between the recapture and rededication of the temple in 165 or 164 BC and the death of Judas. But it's doubtful that this letter, with its back reference to Judas's collections of books lost in an account of the war, and its claim that God has returned to the land, the kingship, the priesthood, and the consecration could possibly date from those difficult days when the land was under Seleucid control. There was no Jewish monarchy, and the high priests Menelaus and Alcimus were anathema to the Hasmoneans. Time must be allowed for the development of the biblical and legendary associations of the festival so visible in this letter. Goldstein argues that the festival mentioned directly only in 118 and 216 was not the principal focus of interest in this letter. The real concern was rather to support the holiness of the Jerusalem temple against the challenge from Onias IV's temple at Leontopolis. Thus, the Jerusalem temple could claim possession of the genuine altar fire restored by Nehemiah. Goldstein believes the letter was written at a crisis time for Egyptian Jews in 103 BC, when their protectress, Cleopatra III, was under pressure from the invasion of Ptolemy IX. The letter was addressed appropriately to Aristobulus as a representative of the Oniad house, the Leontopolis temple being founded by Onias IV. It further says, the editor, who associated this letter with the first letter and with the following abridgment of Jason of Cyrene's work, which begins with a reference to the purification of the temple and the dedication of the altar in 219, which we'll get to shortly, clearly thought that its subject was the festival of purification. The date of the letter remains uncertain unless, as Torrey thinks, the year 188 in chapter 1, verse 9, should be associated with it.
Which we had a long discussion on.
Right, we did. But the reference to the restoration of the land and kingship might indicate a date in the early years of Janaeus, 103 through 76 BC, who put the title king on his coins and enlarged his kingdom to its biblical boundaries.
And the thing about the coins, Goldstein actually has those coins right here.
Fucking hey, man.
Yeah, hold on. Let me just do this. Yeah, here they are. Here's some coins. I'm going to show the crowd. Here you are, people. Get yourself some coins. You see those?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, those are proper. Let me see that.
There you go. Some coins.
Oh, man. Those coins suck. Like, they weren't well preserved at all.
They're not great. There's this whole argument about that he makes about the dating of these coins specifically, and like how pious this person would have been, and because like there's a crown around it, it's like, well, having a diadem would have been, kind of frowned upon. So yeah, so he makes this whole argument, makes a long argument based on that. But that's, neither here nor there.
All right.
I found it inconclusive, so I just didn't even bother writing it down.
Yeah.
So now we are getting into the abridger's preface. So while chapter 3 starts the actual abridgment, this is the epitomist. So this is him saying, here is the work that I am abridging.
Yeah. The author.
Yeah.
Proper.
Probably. Maybe. Because...
We can hope
Yeah,
that the
because...
person who wrote this was the author of this.
You could hope. Because at least one of them. So because the issue is, right, you have these 2 letters.
Mhm.
The 2 letters have now ended.
Yeah.
This is a preface to an abridgment.
Mm.
So whoever wrote this also wrote the abridgment.
Which is, we're not going to cover the entire abridgment in one episode,
No.
but we will be covering it for most of
Yeah.
this.
Yeah.
So, yep, this is the author that we're working with, presumably.
Yeah, this is the author, but then you have to remember those other 2 letters,
Yeah.
which don't necessarily come from the author.
Right.
Jason of Cyrene narrated the history of Judas Maccabeus and his brothers, of the purification of the greatest temples and the dedication of the altar, and also of the wars against Antiochus Epiphanes and his son Eupator, and of the manifest interventions from heaven in favor of those who vied with one. Is it vied with one another?
Oh, what verse is this?
21.
21. And the heavenly manifestations to those who acted strenuously and eagerly.
Okay. With one another in fighting manfully for Judaism. Few though they were, they took the spoils of the entire country and drove out the barbarian hordes, and recovered the world-renowned temple, and freed the city, and reestablished the laws which were on the point of being abolished. All this they accomplished because the Lord, in his fullness of his grace, became merciful to them. What Jason of Cyrene told in 5 books, we shall attempt to abridge into a single volume. His work is a sea of words, and the sheer mass of the material is formidable to anyone who wishes to plunge into the historical narrative. Perceiving these obstacles, we have set ourselves the goal of providing entertainment for lovers of literature, a clear and memorable style for pursuers of wisdom, and edification for all who look into this book. So the abridgment was made for entertainment, but also educational purposes. It's kind of how we do our stuff.
What? So
according to
this
this
is
guy,
written in Greek,
yeah,
I assume.
Yeah.
Right? He specifically uses we. So we being more than one, you know? He specifically uses we multiple times. He uses
True.
plurals to refer to himself.
Mhm.
Now, what I'm going to assume is that it wasn't just one person working on this.
Or maybe they mean that, like, you know how when we say that, like, we went to the moon, like, I didn't go to the moon, right? You didn't go to the moon, but I can say we went to the moon because in that context, I'm talking about humanity in general.
Yes, but when we say we concede to the historian the minute presentation concerning every particular, we mean we.
We
Context
could.
clues, guys. Context. It's fine.
We could.
We likely do in every situation that we say that. In fact,
I don't know.
well, we can also say that there's a vagary
Oh.
because every time that we have said we, with the exception of that time, it is possible that we meant we,
Right.
and as opposed to we.
Thank you.
Quite
Sure.
bad. But I am going to assume that this was an effort to summarize the works of Jason of Cyrene
Mhm.
by multiple people, perhaps as a means of taking something that's very long and just like getting it out there to more people.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, probably people work together for it. Sure. At least for the abridgment.
Yeah.
We ourselves hesitated to undertake the abridgment. Yeah, indeed, it exacts a price of sweat and sleepless nights. The man who prepares a banquet and seeks to benefit his fellow man has no light task. Just so, I have cheerfully accepted the pain for the sake of performing a public service. So now it's I.
When he says I,
He means we.
well, so what he could mean
Maybe he's the
is-
one physically writing this final thing while the
Right. He could have had a translation effort by multiple people for something. He could have, like, anything, really. Really, it could be just about anything. But I mean, for obviously, that's the person who's physically writing
Yeah.
the thing.
That's what I'm thinking.
But I presume, like, a lot of people, even in the books they have today, like, you open up any book by a historian, and he's like, I would like to give thanks to Dr. So-and-so of the Institute from such and such
Sure.
for their, but they don't do that here. But it's unlikely that they had absolutely no assistance in their accumulation of information and their gathering of at least the materials that they're, splicing together, abridging.
Yeah, I think it would make sense for, a whole bunch of people working on abridgment while this one guy writes it down
Yeah.
into like a final compilation.
Yeah.
Anyways, apparently it's very stressful. We shall leave the exact date and detailed narrative to the author of the unabridged work and proceed in... you fucking asshole.
What?
What an asshole. He just said he's going to leave out the date and all the details. And I'm like, no, you douche. That's the stuff we wanted.
And do we have access to that anymore?
No, that doesn't exist.
Oh, so all we have is this abridgment.
If he did it, if he put in the date, we just could have had it. It would have been
He even
so
says,
easy.
I'm neglecting this potentially extremely relevant information.
Like, I know at the time he would not have known that we wouldn't have the works of
But it's
Jason
so
anymore.
frustrating in retrospect.
Right?
Yeah.
Ugh.
But we don't need them because we have an abridged version.
Oh, what a douche. Just leaving it out on purpose. Okay,
Yeah.
whatever. Now I'm mad at this dude.
Well, like,
I am
yeah,
mad at the epitomist now.
He's
I
just
never
straight
in my,
up
hold on. I never
Yeah.
thought in my life I would be mad at a person who lived over 2,000 years ago.
Really? I mean, there are some very frustrating people.
Yes, but I'm not
in the
actively
past.
mad
Yeah,
at them.
well,
I
he's-
guess you're actively
he's
upset at
outright,
him
like,
now, yes.
I know the dates. I've read the dates. They're in this book. I'm not going to write them down again. Yep.
It's so frustrating.
Yeah, that's bad.
Oh, you douche. Okay. Let's go on. I'm going to write a book about how mad I am. I'm going to rant about it later. So anyways, yeah, we shall leave the exact and detailed narrative to the author of the unabridged work and proceed in our labors along the lines of an abridgment. My relationship to the original author, I think, is like that between a builder and a painter. The architect of a new house has to think of the entire structure, whereas he who undertakes to draw a house in encaustic or paint has to consider the rules of perspective. Just so, to go into a topic and explore its ramifications and inquire closely into details befits the original author of our history, but a summarizer must be allowed to strive for brevity of expression and excuse himself from exhaustive treatment of the facts.
Yeah, like he said. So this commentary says, they refer to a flood of statistics. There's some Greek.
Yeah.
Tu chima or chema ton arithmon. It should be translated as large numbers of lines. The length of books was counted in terms of written lines. number of written lines given at the end of the papyrus roll as a comprehensive number. The author says that Jason's books have too many lines.
Yeah, pretty much. Too many to count.
Yep. Too much. It's too hard.
Yeah.
It's not that hard.
We'll make it easier by making it shorter.
Apparently, a lot of ancient authors made a lot of ancient historians made those kinds of metaphorical, parallels because they tried to differentiate their work from others. So I guess it's just completely in line with the times then, how he does that. So, having added this much explanation to our statement of purpose, let us begin our narrative at this point, for it is silly to let the preface of our history grow long while abridging the history itself. This is
that not also frustrating?
Yeah, this is kind of when Chris and I are in the car and I'm trying to listen to something and he's like, I'll let you listen to your own thing, but I was just trying to illustrate my thoughts on this because blah, 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 blah. It's like you just said in the first thing.
I try not to monologue, but apparently I still have like a 1/4 chance to just end up going on and on about something.
Anyways, do you have any closing notes?
Yeah, I've just a little bit from Eerdmans here.
Okay.
5 themes or topoi are listed. The story of Judas Maccabeus and his brothers, the purification of the temple, already underlined by the 2 prefixed letters, 1:1 through 2:18, the dedication of the altar, the wars against Antiochus IV and V, and the divine epiphanies that inspired those who fought for Judaism, e.g., 3:23 through 40, which we'll get into. These, like the contrast between those who fought for Judaism and the barbarian hordes and the liberation of Jerusalem, are themes to attract the reader, not a synopsis or precis of the book. To a Greek, barbaroi were those who spoke a non-Greek language. To a Greek-speaking Jew, the word clearly carried further connotations. Abel notes that the author's audacity in contrasting the Jews, not Greeks, with barbarians. There's a little more about this barbarians thing, right? Yeah. It says the author further contrasts Judaism with barbarism. Barbarian was the word Greeks used for non-Greeks. Here, the author turns the usage topsy-turvy and portrays the Greek Seleucids as barbarians. This is the first known occurrence of the word Judaism, perhaps coined in opposition to Hellenism and Alophilism.
Yeah, I don't know what that is. So.
Foreign ways. Furthermore, I mean, there's not really much that I can say about that little introductory note that the author had
definitely
there.
It's basically just like, this isn't the whole thing. This isn't the whole history.
Yeah.
I'm abridging this work because the work was very long and people need to know this information.
Yep.
That's basically...
Should have left the dates.
Yeah, we're just going to leave out the vital parts of the
Seriously, like all the... Like, I kind of want the details, man. Like, especially a date. I mean, he didn't actually say date. He didn't actually say he left out the date specifically, but that's probably one of the details that he left out. So,
nope. But hey, if you enjoyed our stream today, give us a like.
Quick, but
all right.
What were you gonna say?
Say your thing.
Levi Thorstone asks about.
If there's no consequences, is there such a thing as moral or bad/evil if everything is meaningless? Well, meaning and morality.
Absurd question.
Meaning and morality
are
different things.
But I'd love to have a nihilism AMA at some point, but nobody ever cares.
I'll say outright that's an absurd question.
It kind of is,
because if we say there's no consequences, then any consequentialist basis of attributing good or evil properties onto any actions would be completely non-existent, right? No consequences means that actually there's no causation, right? Because when I lift this up and drop it, it's falling as a consequence of me having dropped it. So no consequences.
Well, there's also
in an ontic sense.
Well, it's falling as a consequence of gravity.
Right.
So just because you let it go, it doesn't fall. It only falls because of gravity.
Right.
And you let it go.
Right. It's a consequence of gravity in accordance with my action of having
Sure.
let it go. If there's no consequences at all, then, well, there's no basis for any judgment of morality. Because,
Sure. But,
right,
you know,
but I think what they mean is like the consequences of having performed bad actions, being punished like hell or something like that. Right.
Yeah.
So, like, well, if there's no consequences.
There are a
So
lot of passive animals.
we do a lot of stuff like animals do.
Yeah, but
we
there are a lot of
we have
passive
wars
animals.
and we have. I mean, that we're the only ones that have wars.
Oh,
Ants
no,
have
no,
wars.
no, no,
No?
no. Chimpanzees have wars.
Ants.
Rats.
I didn't know that.
There
You
are
know
rats
ants?
in New York
Ants.
City right now. Ants also have wars, but
There's
rats.
a Siberian war that's been going for 17 years between massive ants and termite colonies, and they won't stop fighting each other until either the termites or the ants win.
Well, either way, we are animals.
Right.
So
and this is how the animal that is Homo sapien acts.
yeah, but because we're smart enough to realize how other people are feeling about things, we can have a sense of empathy,
Right.
and we can do things for it might be a little circular, but for the sake of when people say for goodness sake, it's for the sake of being good. I mean, if you put a little bit of good into the world, that good comes back to you because your actions affect people, and people affect you back. So it is
Shut up, Lawrence.
in your best interest.
You always tell me to shut up.
It is in your best interest to do good.
Yeah. So, like, if you're going to McDonald's, right, and you just talk shit about all of the employees every time that you walk into the building, there's a pretty high likelihood that they're going to hawk a loogie in your burger.
Yeah, or just ban you from the place, and it's just better to be better.
So anyways, in reference to Thorstone's original question about the morality of things being good and evil, I think it's important to consider that there are an incredibly large amount of perspectives that people have had, and including ones where things are meaningless. That's fine to consider as well. It's just that if we look at all of them overall, they can also cancel out to meaninglessness. But that doesn't mean we don't have our own subjective lens to consider. We're a person. Yeah, that whole animal thing you just mentioned, we need to meet some social needs and stuff like that, and eat and whatever. So it gives you... You have to have that bodily perspective with being alive, unfortunately. So you get that.
Yeah. But I mean, also, like, if you perform an action, right, is any given action, it's not inherently good or bad.
Oh, but there's a
And the thing
subjective
is,
lens.
the thing is, we don't really need bad consequences to be good. We can just recognize that we ought to be good.
Right. Well, each person also has their own individual idea of what it means to be good.
Yeah.
And so when we compare, like, with theists, right, a good Christian will spread Christianity. A good Muslim will spread Islam. Both of these two actions are diametrically opposed to each other. They're not similar. I mean, they're performing the same action, but
I
with
have met a
different
person
objects.
who
Right.
believed that in both and deciding that they should just spread them all. That was a weird
But
choice.
I agree with Kavi. It's not even really the show for that. But anyways,
But
if
yeah.
you guys enjoyed
No, I
this,
love these conversations. I wish we
they're-
could do AMAs, but that's not here.
We
or
can't,
now.
yeah.
Yeah,
that's not
Lawrence doesn't like talking about
because it's the show.
moral philosophy.
And also, it's the show where we do a specific thing.
It's nice to engage with the audience at the end a little.
Yeah.
Thank you for your question.
I do
I'm
what I
glad for the
want.
conversation for what it's worth.
Either way, thank you everyone for joining us. We hope you enjoyed the stream. We know it was kind of long. Yeah, 2 hours. Yeah, that's pretty long. We had a lot to talk about today. We were introducing Second Maccabees. So if you enjoy the stream, drop a like because we really appreciate it. It really helps us. And if you like what we do, want to support us, we have a Patreon. We also have a Teespring. What else we got?
We've got, well, besides Patreon and Teespring, we have an Amazon wish list.
That's true. We do.
We
have
have
an Amazon wish list.
Facebook, Twitter.
Those are free to
Those are
follow
free.
us. Yeah.
Yeah. Our Patreon is great.
Yeah, you can
You
be
can
on
get
the
all
show
sorts of shit from our Patreon.
We have another
Yeah, you can get-
channel.
you can get
Surprisingly,
books
we
and-
forget to mention that.
Yeah, we have another
Yeah, that's
channel that
true.
never gets used.
Yeah.
Who'd like another nihilism AMA? Ask
You
me
remember
anything.
TJ Does Life?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's Milwaukee Atheist Live, basically.
It was just totally dead.
Yeah.
Fair enough. So Sunday, we are continuing Psalms.
We're so close
We
to
are.
being done with Psalms.
So close.
Yep.
And, there's a Nightbot in the chat now with our
Oh.
live streaming channel. Thanks, Nightbot, at the very
Thanks
end
a
there.
lot,
Chipping in
Nightbot.
at the end there.
Yeah. We should be having a new shirt come out soon.
Oh, yeah, we got the According to Some Jews shirt.
Yes, according to some Jews.
Yep.
And it's okay. We're both Jews.
Yep.
It's fine.
So it's not anti-Semitic.
And also,
It would be if
The
we
Bible.
weren't Jews.
yeah, the Bible according to some Jews right here.
But we have a race card that we can play to get out of any scrutiny
Apparently,
ever,
yeah.
basically.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool, isn't it?
It's so... Man, it's weird how life works.
Get broken.
Yeah.
Either
Check
way.
your privilege.
What else we got going on? I remember I had something else to add on to the end of the show.
Our donation drive.
Oh yeah, our donation drive. That's
We're
right.
really close.
Yeah. I can actually pull that up here. Yeah, I have it. So we are $12.11 away from $666
Oh,
from doing
close.
alchemy.
Yep, and we will be transmuting material.
Expect us to have to order these online now.
I might
I'm
have
confident
to-
the Science Surplus store.
I might have to
Now
get
then.
some solid mercury.
Yeah, go for
That's, great. I hope we can set that up outside on the giant porch.
Mm-hmm. In a poorly ventilated area.
Could
Oh.
swear I had something else to mention.
Oh,
The video. Right.
Oh, yeah. Deuteronomistic History Review.
Yes, it's finally done, and we are. It should be coming out on Monday, I think. We're gonna schedule it. We'll see, because I tried to upload it at home, and it got stuck at 67%, and that was after 14 hours
Almost, yeah.
of uploading. So we're gonna try it here. Hopefully, it works faster here, because it is a 3-hour long
we just
video.
did a 2-hour stream with 0 frames dropped. I'm gonna take a guess it will take 3 hours to upload.
Well, it might be different with an upload. So
We'll see. The quality's similar.
Yeah.
It depends.
Will you be able to discuss philosophy? You know,
we can talk about stuff all the time. But we have
You want
videos
to
and
talk
streams.
about philosophy, Lawrence? Let's talk about philosophy.
Oh man.
We can
All
talk
right.
about
So
philosophy.
Plato's Parts of the Soul,
No.
right? Completely unrelated to anything that we've just talked about, but is part of philosophy.
Yeah, that's true. It is a part of philosophy.
Yep. And we're talking about it right now, are we not?
All right. How about
So
we
categorically, we have met
just,
the criteria,
categorically.
the standard that's been put forward by discussing philosophy. We're talking about
If we ever let me just say this: if we have like AMA streams, stuff like that, or if we happen to be in some hangouts or something, then yeah, you can ask us there. We'll have more time to discuss it. Or if we ever do
I
a video,
really like talking about my personal philosophies.
But for $10,000 a month on our Patreon,
We might not be able to do that.
oh yeah, right now we might not be
At
able
some
to.
point in the
Well,
distant future.
at some point, we will come out and give you a high five, handshake, or
A fist bump.
if you'd like, a rigorous philosophical debate.
We'd love that.
All
right.
right. Well, that's
Anyway.
about it for now.
Yes, thank you everyone for joining us, and we will
See
see
you
you
on
on Sunday.